Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today is the 16th day of March 2022. And I wanted to talk to you about a couple of books, mainly this particular book here, The Global Economic Crisis by Michel Chossudovsky. I pronounced that right. He's a Canadian, not a Canadian, but he's lives in Canada. He's a professor there in Canada. And what I'm reading from, what I'm understanding, what these couple of these books are about, is that this is destruction of all economies throughout the world. This is the whole idea. Um, I don't always agree with everything he says because I have my own theories. One of those theories goes back here with the countries that are part. We have what we call two different sides here. We have what we call the United States and most of Western Europe, and Japan, and a few other countries that are part of what I would call um, what they call, oh goodness, just dropped out of my mind here. To do with the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and the World Bank. And then you have a group of countries that are opposing this in ways, is the countries Russia, China, what we call BRICS, BRICS, which represents Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The whole thing with the WTO and the World Bank are basically pushing what I would call their particular doctrines of economic growth. And if you read the book by not the name of it simply is the economic hitman, it gives you an idea that a lot of corporations in the West have been using and manipulating and stealing material wealth from what we call probably third world countries, basically in Canada. I'm sorry, basically in Africa, and also in Indonesia, and also in South America for their benefit. And when you begin to piece this together and understand what is transpiring, is that it's destruction of the economies of all countries, which in reality, we're not really countries anymore, neither. We're all corporations. The last thing I heard, there were two particular countries that are still, quote unquote, not a part of um, the deal with banking systems, and that was Iran and Syria. But that was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and that may have changed already. And so, what he is speaking of is simply is not only destruction of what it is simply is making countries dependent upon foreigners. And you can look at this in Africa. At one time, Africa itself, many of the countries were self-sustaining, although they were very poor. They were self-sustaining. Some in the southern part and eastern part are what we call economically richer countries. That would be countries like Mozambique, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, and possibly even Namibia, since that used to be Southwest Africa. And these countries have enormous minerals, especially in the area of gold, um, copper, and other metals also. And people are not aware of this. Is that corporations they're not concerned about countries anymore because there aren't any countries. And the United States actually ceased to be a country in 1871. and they've given you all the propaganda and telling you that we are a country, and that's why countries fight wars. But in reality, countries are not fighting wars. There's corporations who hire the military to do the dirty work. And so the book with Economic Hitman deals with what I call his idea, the way of coming in and taking eventually, giving a loan to a small country like Panama or Ecuador or some of the countries in Africa, for example, and say, we're going to build you a dam, we're going to do this for you, we're going to put an electrical system in for you in Indonesia. And it comes away simply say, this is a way of making life better, to be more westernized or more civilized. And what happens simply is those countries eventually are unable to pay those debts because the companies that come in there are making tons and tons of money off of these projects they're designing. And it takes many years for those things to be built. And that's for their purpose. And so this is a big deal, a very big deal. And so what's taking place is that countries are given they default on their loan, can't pay it back. And so what transpires is simply is that they become more indebted to the WTO or the World Bank. It's interesting you understand, and I go back in poli-sci many years ago, back in the 80s, and they were already promoting to college students at that time, especially political science, the idea world government. You see, they create these ideas and they plant them in you, and they plant it in a clever way of even propagandizing you to believe that this is the way things are. This is progressing. This is a progressive way of continuing to get better. When reality simply is it's not getting better, it's getting worse. The one of the other ideas that takes place here is United States used to be more self-sustaining, and what I mean by self-sustaining simply is it took care of its independency. That is, it had its manufacturing, its farming, it had its businesses, all what we call laissez-faire in many ways are free enterprise. That companies would be in timber industry, would be in the fishing industry. These are companies, not corporations. There is a difference. Corporations, what I would call is multinational corporations. These corporations are all over the world. When I'm talking corporation, that is, and when I talk about companies, companies are here locally, here in America. They're not worldwide. Okay. And so the United States may produce oranges, banana. I think we don't produce bananas. We buy them, but there are many products that we have that are grown here, and so we're what we call self-sustaining. And this self-sustaining means self-independence. It's not what they're telling you today. Okay, they use a byword of that, and they claim it's sustainable when it's not sustainable. The only way it's self-sustainable, self-sustaining, is to quote unquote do it yourself, grow it yourself, produce it yourself. You see, not being dependent upon an outward entity. But that was also a part of the whole deal with NAFTA and the breakdown of the barriers, because simply it's the only legitimate way of taxing or importing things was to protect its own industries and its own farmers, its own mining industry in that way, even the fishing industry. And people don't see that. Look around you and look and see what we produce nowadays. I mean, you can go buy crackers from Nabisco, and Nabisco's products are no longer made here in the United States. Nabisco stands for North American Biscuit Company, is what it stood for. And if you look at the history of it, if you look at it, it bought out many small or medium-sized biscuit companies or grain operations to the point simply it became a conglomerate, a corporation. So the Ritz crackers, whatever else is made by them, Nabisco, is owned and is produced now in Mexico. Part of the Mars products, your candies and stuff like that, is no longer made here in the United States, but is made in Mexico. So these are jobs that we want here. And I'm not crazy about candy, such and such, because they're not really good for you. But the point simply, and also crackers, but it gives you an idea of where the shift is taking place. And this is all part of NAFTA. And there's another thing that took place in industry in the 90s. It began to take place at just the same time as the NAFTA deal was. Just in time, what they call just in time shipping. And that idea was simply proposed at that point. What's the point? That's we can logistically work this thing out to the point simply we can order things from foreign countries or wherever it's coming from, bring it here, and we don't even have to have it warehouse that. In other words, we don't have to keep things in stock as much. So this cuts down on costs, is what they were thinking about. So plants would order certain things, and then what they would do is simply they'd wait till they're running a little low, and it's getting to the point we need to reorder. So they reorder it, and that would be either shipped either here by ship or by plane, and then it would be here. So what happens simply is the companies or corporations didn't have to spend as much money in warehousing their products or raw materials. You see, so they didn't have to put as much capital out there in that particular deal, and they basically didn't have to have as many workers to be in those warehouses because it doesn't need to be maintained all the time, so to speak. So all these things took place. Then another thing interesting took place. And this is all taking place in the last 30 years, folks. A lot of this is just the last 30 years. All this massive change. This was supposed to be better for us, but in reality, it's been detrimental, and it's going to get more detrimental. And so what happened was when I was talking about the African countries, they grew their own crops, and they're small farmers. We know really small farmers. There weren't really anybody large. And what we did was also entice them, say, hey, move to the cities. You got a brighter life there. There's some factories there in Africa and African cities. Move to the cities and do away with your rural area. There's you're producing rice and this and such as hogs, and it's very manual, and we can do it a whole lot better elsewhere. And so many farmers were destroyed by this, by coming in saying we can ship it in cheaper and you can even produce it. And so that destroyed what little economic structure was there in those countries. For example, the countries of Chad and Central African Republic, Cameroon, other countries, this was probably 15 to 20 years ago, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. The per capita income, that means per individual income, that is for a person or family. And you can find all this information in the World Almanac, is that most of these people made less than $400 or $500 a year. Okay. So how in the world, this is what you got to understand, when, like, for example, this is a good example. How can someone afford a radio or television or any modern so-called conveniences in that particular society? And that's why they made what we call probably 20 years ago, 25 years ago, what they made mass produce, what they call shortwave radios that were probably no more than $10 or $15 at the most, in order for them to get their news throughout Africa or in South America. So another phenomenon you'll notice that simply is that most of the wars that take place are actually in the northern hemisphere, unlike the southern hemisphere. I don't think there's ever been a war that's ever taken place in Australia. I don't think there's ever been as many wars in Africa, although that they say that's tribal, but that would also do with the colonial powers that entered that sphere in the 1860s 1860s, 1870s, such and such. So I'm trying to tie this all together in some ways for you to understand how this whole thing is taking place. And we're basically at the last rung of the whole deal here. And that's part of, you can see this, you can see it. If you're clearly wanting to see it, you can see it. If you have that desire. Most people want to stick their heads in the sand and pretend that everything's fine. Yet their whole instincts about who they are is saying you're not waking up, you're not paying attention here. And so what transpires is taking place simply is that the United States is a military power, and it's a bully. The United States is a bully. The whole deal with the WTO is to deal with the whole thing, World Trade Center, WTC, I'm sorry, to do with what I would call creating enemies, and for us to go in and invade and destroy their country. And companies like Bechtel, I'm trying to think of the other company, it'll come to me, that go back in and repair what has been damaged, building either waste treatment plants or water power dams or electrical deal. It's for them to make the money, see. So this is all corporation. So no wonder they want wars, because they destroy infrastructure, which they destroy what we call older architecture for a reason. They don't want others to see what is being there in the past and how things were made thousands of years ago and is still there. They want to put up what we call cheap items and then within 20 or 30 years destroy it. Or not destroy it, but actually it falls apart. Just look at what the buildings are nowadays. Look at them. Look at how the designs of buildings today, how cheaply they're made. They're not made to last. They're not. Yet they cost a fortune to do because our money's not worth anything. So as we continue to go on this whole deal, so the United States goes, and part of it's to do with the pipeline. There are competitors here that want to natural gas. This is all to deal with this. See, this you can see how this goes together, because the United States now is, imports a ton of, I don't want to say ton, but the natural gas, even though it's here, we have plenty of it. It's to make us dependent too. That's the whole idea. See, so we're not any better than other countries. We're just all of us being dependent upon somebody else. And eventually, what that means simply is that you have what we call supply lines, and there's an opportunity of breakage, or not being able to get the product here, or get the gas here, or whatever it is. It creates a dependency, and this is what the other company I was going to tell you is Halliburton. Halliburton's the other company that got enormous contracts from the government. And actually, there were many Americans that actually, I knew one or two here in a local area that would go over there and make over $100,000 just driving a truck. Citizens. This is also why many countries in Europe and the United States are people coming in, foreigners, they're allowed to become citizens when they have nothing to offer except cheap labor to also bring the country down and destroy it. So all these things are taking place. And also simply is to destroy what we call the whole glue that holds society together. You see, that's what else is going on here. And so what happens simply is that we're becoming more and more dependent. And that's quite the opposite of what our country was 150 years ago. That's why there's not going to be much need, because everything's being automated to the point simply is no one needs to work anymore because you're no longer useful. I find it really strange too, also, as I look, hold on a second here. I find it strange that this country at one time, let's just talk about railroads. Railroads are by far the most efficient way of actually moving products, by far. Far better than truckers. They can do far better. And they have their own infrastructure themselves, so they're not dependent upon roads. See, they have rails, and those rails move trains, the cars, that type of thing. And they're pulled by what we call large diesel locomotives that can pull miles of railroad cars behind them. Extremely efficient in that way. And it become far more efficient because there are only so few of them now compared to what it used to be. And we have allowed this infrastructure to be destroyed around us because we believe that truckers are better at what they're doing when they're actually destroying the road systems that they're on. You see, that's another thing people don't bear. They'll claim that they pay taxes. Sure, you pay taxes, but also simply is that they're not efficient, and their jobs will be gone too because they're moving in that direction to do with what I would call everything's going to be robotic. Everything's going to be robotic, and there won't be any need for people. And people say, "Well, we don't have to work anymore," and they think that's glorious. In some ways, it may be glorious for some, but for others, it's going to be detrimental because there won't be any jobs for people. So this is what I'm sharing with you, and I would suggest that you go to this particular guy's site. I don't agree with everything he says. Like I said, it's www.globalresearch.co. I'm sorry, CA is what it is. And so you may want to look at this. I bought these books used, and there's nothing wrong with them. In fact, I don't even think the people they bought them. They never opened up the paper. They never even opened them up. In other words, they didn't read them. There's some huge what I would call two consortiums here in America that deals with grain, and that's ADM and Cargill. They're massive corporations. They deal with wheat, soy, everything agriculturally. You see, so this is what's happening. The United States is no longer a country. We still believe that. I even say it myself, but it's actually a corporation. It's been since 1871. We eventually went through bankruptcy a couple of times in our history, but it was all for the benefit of the bankers. It benefited them. That's what it did. You see, it didn't benefit the normal person. You see, so I thought I'd share this with you. I have, you're welcome to ask questions. Are you really willing to ask questions here and to look into things? Or are you just going to stick your head in the sand and pretend things are okay? Okay? I'm older than you. I've been down the road many times. I have wisdom. I have knowledge. But most people think they know better. And, it's sad because most people my age, this is true, are watching television. They're completely watching television. They're oblivious of what's going on. They don't want to know anything. They're happy with their life, supposedly. Yet their health is terrible. They don't take care of themselves because they don't love themselves. So anyway, I wish you a great day. And if you've got questions, again, I'll be glad to answer them. Have a great day. Thank you.